And that, kids, is why you should never, ever give a human coffee, before a intergalactic negotiation Ambassador Zix 427 concluded, his tentacles waving dramatically as he addressed the eager young diplomats in training gathered before him. A chorus of confused chirps and whistles filled the lecture hall. One brave soul, a Zorblaxian with more eyes than common sense, raised a trembling appendage. But sir, isn't coffee just a harmless human beverage? Ambassador Zix 427 let out a sound that could only be described as a mixture of a laugh and a gargle, the Centaurian equivalent of a snort. "Oh, my dear, naive little lava," he chuckled, his bioluminescent spots flashing in amusement. "If only you knew the half of it. Gather round, you snot-nosed guppies, and let me regale you with the tale of how humanity turned the tables on the entire galactic community with nothing more than a pot of what they called Java." The young aliens shuffled closer, their array of tentacles, claws, and various exoskeletons clacking against the floor in anticipation. Zix 427 cleared his throat, all 7 of them, and began. "It all started on what the humans call a Monday now. I know what you're thinking, Ambassador. What in the name of the Great Void is a Monday? Well, buckle up, Buttercup, because that's just the tip of the WTF iceberg when it comes to humans and their relationship with this brown, liquid madness they call coffee." Captain Sarah Caffeinated Chaos Chen stared at the view screen of the USS Jittery Joe, Earth's first faster-than-light capable diplomatic vessel. The vast expanse of space stretched out before her, twinkling with the promise of new horizons, undiscovered civilizations, and hopefully, a decent cup of coffee. "All right, crew," she announced, her voice carrying the weight of humanity's future and an empty coffee mug. "We've done it. We've successfully navigated through the treacherous waters of bureaucracy, survived the perilous journey of diplomatic training, and somehow managed to build this tin can without it exploding on the launch pad. Now, we face our greatest challenge yet." The bridge crew leaned forward in anticipation, their faces a mix of awe, excitement, and mild caffeine withdrawal. "We need to find out if the Galactic Council has a decent coffee maker." A collective groan rippled through the bridge, punctuated by a few facepalms and one enthusiastic "hell yeah" from the ship's engineer, Dave, who was currently on his 5th espresso of the shift. Captain First Officer Raj interjected, his voice strained with the effort of maintaining professionalism. "With all due respect, we're about to make first contact with the Galactic Council. Don't you think we should focus on, I don't know, not causing an interstellar incident?" Sarah swiveled in her captain's chair, fixing Raj with a look that could have melted neutronium. "Listen here, Raj. We've been surviving on instant coffee for the past 6 months. If I don't get some real caffeine soon, the only diplomatic incident we'll be causing is between my foot and some poor alien's ass." Before Raj could argue further, a series of alarms blared across the bridge. Red lights flashed, bathing the crew in an ominous glow that clashed horribly with the ship's beige interior. "Captain," the sensor officer, Lieutenant Kim, shouted over the cacophony, "we've got an incoming transmission from the Galactic Council station." Sarah leapt to her feet, her coffee-deprived brain kicking into high gear. On screen, Kim, "And someone get me a cup of coffee before I start gnawing on the control panel." The view screen flickered to life, revealing a sight that would have made lesser crews soil their standard-issue spacesuits. A being that looked like the unholy offspring of a squid and a disco ball materialized, its tentacles waving in what Sarah hoped was a greeting, and not a preting, and not a prelude to digestion. "Greetings, primitive vessel," the alien's voice boomed through the speakers, dripping with enough condescension to make a Kardashian jealous. "This is High Counselor Zlorbax of the Galactic Confederation. You have entered restricted space. Prepare to be boarded, evaluated, and possibly turned into a rather fetching decoration for my office." Sarah blinked, processing the threat with all the grace of a drunk giraffe on roller skates. Then, she did something that would go down in history as either the bravest or the most idiotic move in human history. She yawned.
Not just a small, polite yawn, mind you. This was a full-blown, jaw-cracking, potentially dislocating yawn that echoed through the bridge and across the vacuum of space.
"I'm sorry," she mumbled, rubbing her eyes. "But did you seriously just threaten to turn us into office decor? What are you, the galaxy's worst interior decorator?" The bridge crew stared at their captain in horror, fully expecting to be vaporized at any moment. Instead, there was a long, pregnant pause from the alien counselor. What High Counselor Zlorbax's voice had lost its menacing edge, replaced by utter confusion. Did you just yawn at me? Sarah, still blinking sleepily, shrugged. Well, yeah, come on. Prepare to be boarded, evaluated, and turned into a decoration. That's not a threat, that's the setup for a bad joke at an IKEA.
Another pause, this one so long that Sarah briefly wondered if the aliens had left in a huff. Then, unexpectedly, a different voice came over the comm, higher-pitched and slightly manic.
By the great void, she's right. Zlorbax, you big doofus, I told you that line was too much. Shut up, glooped as Zlorbax hissed, his attempt at a private conversation clearly failing. This is why Mom never lets you lead the diplomatic missions. Sarah exchanged bemused glances with her crew. First contact was going. Well, not according to any protocol they'd ever studied, but at least they weren't furniture yet. Excuse me, she interjected, raising her hand as if she were back in grade school. Hi, yes, Captain Sarah Chen of Earth here. Quick question, do you guys have any coffee on that fancy space station of yours? We've been in space for months, and I'm dying for a decent cup. The silence that followed was so profound that Sarah could have sworn she heard the universe itself do a double take. You did. Did you just interrupt our first contact to ask about a beverage? Zlorbax's voice was a mixture of incredulity and something that sounded suspiciously like admiration. Well, yes, Sarah replied, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. You're clearly not going to turn us into lava lamps, mostly because I'm pretty sure my engineer would make a terrible mood light, so I figured we might as well get down to the important stuff. Like caffeine, preferably of the freshly brewed variety.
What happened next would be debated by xenoanthropologists for centuries to come. The fearsome Galactic Council, poised to evaluate and potentially subjugate the puny human vessel, erupted into chaos. Shouts, arguments, and what sounded suspiciously like hysterical laughter echoed across the comm channel.
Finally, after what felt like an eternity, but was probably closer to 5 minutes during which Sarah seriously considered ordering Dave to make a coffee run with the escape pod, Zlorbax's voice returned. Captain Chen of Earth, he began, his tone a mixture of resignation and amusement. In all my cycles of evaluating primitive species, I have never encountered one quite like you. You face potential subjugation, and your primary concern is coffee. Sarah shrugged, a gesture lost on the audio-only communication. What can I say? We humans have our priorities straight. Now, are you going to help us find some caffeine, or do I need to send Dave out there with a space tether and a will work for coffee sign? Another pause, this one punctuated by what sounded suspiciously like alien facepalms. Then, to everyone's surprise, Zlorbax began to laugh. Not an evil, maniacal laugh, but a genuine belly laugh that seemed to shake the very fabric of space-time. Oh, by the cosmic jester, he wheezed, I haven't laughed like that since the great Snorfblatt incident of cycle 7392. Captain Chen, I believe we may have gotten off on the wrong appendage here. Perhaps we should discuss this situation over a drink. And, just like that, the course of galactic history changed forever. Hold up, one of the young diplomats interrupted, their gelatinous form quivering with indignation. You expect us to believe that humans avoided subjugation and potential furniturification because their captain wanted coffee? Ambassador Zix 427 fixed the student with all four of his eyes, his expression a mixture of amusement and exasperation. Oh, my dear, sweet, summer lava, he chuckled, that's not even the craziest part of the story. You see, what happened next is where things really got interesting. The young aliens leaned in closer, their various sensory organs straining to catch every word. Zix 427 cleared his throats again and continued. The next few hours aboard the Galactic Council space station were a whirlwind of activity that would have made a tornado jealous. Captain Sarah Chen, along with a carefully selected team, read whoever looked least likely to accidentally start an interstellar war over proper coffee brewing techniques, found themselves escorted through corridors that looked like the love child of a disco ball and a coral reef. As it turned out, High Counselor Zlorbax and his species, the Zarlaxians, were not the terrifying evaluators their initial transmission had suggested. In fact, they were more akin to the galaxy's most enthusiastic, if somewhat misguided, bureaucrats. You see. Zlorbax explained as he led the human delegation through hallways that pulsed with bioluminescent light. We've been traveling the galaxy for eons, seeking out new civilizations. But everyone we've encountered has either been too primitive to be interesting or so advanced that they just pat us on the head and send us on our way. Sarah nodded sympathetically, trying not to stare at the walls that seemed to be breathing, or the fact that Zlorbax's left tentacle was currently engaged in what appeared to be a heated game of rock, paper, scissors with his right tentacle. So, you figured you'd spice things up by playing intergalactic bad cops. Zlorbax's central eye cluster beamed, a sight that was equal parts endearing and terrifying. Exactly. We thought, why not add a little drama to the first contact scenario, make it memorable, you know? Oh, it's memorable, all right, muttered Raj, who was still trying to figure out if the hovering orb following him was a security drone or the alien equivalent of a curious puppy. As they entered what appeared to be the station's main gathering area, a vast, circular room with a ceiling that displayed a real-time view of the surrounding space, Sarah couldn't help but feel a twinge of disappointment. I hate to be that girl, she said, but I was promised coffee. I'm not seeing any coffee. This lack of coffee disturbs me. Zlorbax's eye clusters, all 17 of them, widened in alarm. Oh, Sornak, I knew we forgot something. Glupta, he bellowed, causing the humans to wince and several nearby crystals to shatter. Where's that culinary replicator you've been tinkering with? A small, blob-like creature that looked like the unholy offspring of a jellyfish and a lava lamp came zooming into the room, trailing sparks and what appeared to be half-formed sandwiches. Right here, boss. I've almost got it calibrated for human consumables. Just a few more tweaks and boom. The resulting explosion was, in Sarah's professional opinion, spectacular. It was also, according to her nose's professional opinion, heavenly. As the smoke cleared, the room found itself covered in a fine mist of what could only be described as the galaxy's most improbable coffee. Well, Sarah said, licking a droplet from her lips and feeling her eyes widen as the caffeine hit her system, it's not exactly a venti double-shot espresso, but I've got to hand it to you, you guys know how to make an entrance.
Zlorbax, covered from eye cluster to tentacle tip in a fine sheen of coffee, looked mortified. Oh, great void, I'm so sorry. This isn't how first contact is supposed to go at all. We've ruined everything.
But to his surprise, and the surprise of every human except Sarah, who was too busy trying to gather as much coffee as possible into her hands, the Earth delegation burst into laughter. Are you kidding? Chief Engineer Dave exclaimed, licking coffee off his elbow with the desperation of a man who'd been denied his fix for far too long. This is the best first contact ever, way better than those stuffy simulations they made us run back at the academy. And just like that, the ice was broken. As humans and aliens alike began to clean up the delicious disaster, a curious thing happened. They started to talk, not the formal, stilted diplomatic speech that usually characterized such meetings, but real, honest-to-goodness conversation. The Zarlaxians, it turned out, were fascinated by humanity. Their questions came rapid-fire, each more bizarre than the last. Is it true that you humans voluntarily ingest this stimulant multiple times a day? One asked, referring to coffee. Oh, honey, Sarah replied with a grin that was growing more manic by the second. You haven't lived until you've had a triple espresso at 3 a.m. while cramming for exams. The alien's look of horror was priceless. And you actually function without a hive mind or collective consciousness? Another inquired, having heard tales of human individuality. Function is a strong word, Raj snorted, watching as Sarah began to vibrate slightly from the caffeine overload. It's more like we stumble through life powered by caffeine, spite, and the occasional burrito. As the impromptu coffee party continued, Sarah found herself in deep conversation with Zlorbax. Despite his initial bluster, the alien counselor was actually quite thoughtful, and dare she say it, fun. You know, Zlorbax mused, absently twirling a strand of what looked suspiciously like cosmic string around one of his tentacles. In all our travels, we've never encountered a species quite like yours. Most react to us with either fear or disdain. But you asked for coffee.
Sarah shrugged, a gesture she was quickly realizing didn't translate well to multi-limbed species. What can I say? We humans have a knack for finding common ground in the absurd. And let's face it, this whole situation is pretty absurd. Zlorbax nodded, his central eye cluster looking pensive, while his peripheral clusters engaged in what appeared to be a staring contest with each other. Perhaps that's what we've been missing all along. The ability to find joy in the unexpected, to bond over shared experiences, even if that experience is just enjoying a good beverage.
Oh boy, Sarah thought, recognizing the beginnings of a profound, potentially history-altering moment. She briefly considered trying to say something diplomatic and profound. Then she remembered she was covered in alien-made coffee and decided, screw it. Listen, Zlorbax, she said, clapping him on what she hoped was a shoulder and not a sensitive reproductive organ. Life's too short, or in your case, probably too long to take everything so seriously. Sometimes you've just got to embrace the chaos, laugh at the absurdity of it all, and maybe explode a coffee maker or two along the way. Zlorbax stared at her for a long moment, his multiple eye clusters blinking in unison as he processed her words. Then, slowly, a smile spread across his face, or at least the part of his anatomy that Sarah assumed was a face. You know what, Captain Chen? I think you might be onto something there. And that, dear readers, was how the course of galactic history changed. Not with a bang, well, aside from the coffee explosion, not with a whimper, but with a caffeine-fueled laugh and a shared cup of improbable Java. In the days that followed, news of the human encounter spread across the Galactic Confederation like wildfire, if wildfire could travel faster than light and had a penchant for terrible puns about coffee. The Zarlaxians, led by a suddenly very jovial Zlorbax, became humanity's biggest cheerleaders. You've got to meet them, Zlorbax insisted at the emergency session of the Galactic Council. They're crazy, absolutely bonkers, but in the best possible way. The Council, a collection of beings so diverse that they made the cantina scene in Star Wars look like a meeting of the Borg, was skeptical to say the least. High Councillor Zlorbax intoned the Grand Arbiter, a being that looked like a sentient cloud of glitter with anger management issues. Are you seriously suggesting we welcome these humans into the Galactic Confederation based on their ability to laugh at explosions and consume mind-altering beverages? Zlorbax's central eye cluster nodded enthusiastically, while his peripheral clusters performed what could only be described as the alien equivalent of jazz hands. Absolutely. You don't understand, they're unlike anything we've ever encountered. They're chaotic, unpredictable, and have a bizarre obsession with roasted bean juice. But they're also brilliant, adaptable, and make excellent conversation partners.
A horrified gasp rippled through the council chamber.
No, Zlorbax backpedaled frantically, all of his eye clusters blinking in unison. I meant they're excellent at having conversations. Cosmic Jester's teeth, we're not barbarians. As the council devolved into bickering that would make a kindergarten playground look like a model of decorum, a small delegation of humans was being led through the sprawling space station that served as the seat of galactic government. Captain Sarah Chen, still picking stray coffee grounds out of her hair, stared wide-eyed at the menagerie of alien life forms bustling around them. Holy grounds and bitter brews, she muttered. It's like someone took every sci-fi convention I've ever been to, pumped it full of espresso, and then launched it into space. Captain Raj hissed, trying and failing not to stare at a being that appeared to be a sentient latte art. Maybe we should try to be a little more diplomatic. Sarah snorted, a sound that caused a nearby gelatinous alien to vibrate in alarm. Raj, my friend, we're so far out of our depth here that we've circled back around to the shallow end. Might as well embrace the absurdity. Their alien guide, a lanky being that looked like a walking, talking coffee plant, had a torrid love affair with a fiber-optic cable, chittered nervously. Esteemed humans, the Grand Council is ready to see you now. Please try not to cause any interstellar incidents. We just got the place cleaned after the great caffeine catastrophe of cycle 7393. As the doors to the council chamber swung open, Sarah squared her shoulders, put on her best "I'm not about to accidentally declare war on half the galaxy" smile, and strode in like she owned the place. The silence that fell over the assembled aliens was so profound that you could have heard a coffee bean drop if, of course. Coffee beans weren't now considered a controlled substance in 16 systems due to an unfortunate incident involving the jittery emperor of Espressonia and a rather overzealous barista. Sarah, never one to let a dramatic moment go to waste, decided to open with what she hoped was a universal gesture of peace and goodwill. She grinned, threw her arms wide, and declared in her most captainly voice, "What's brewing? Space beans. Who's ready for a galactic coffee clatch?" The resulting chaos was, in a word, spectacular. Half the council leapt to their various appendages in outrage. The other half seemed torn between laughter and calling for immediate quarantine of these clearly caffeinated beings. One poor diplomat, a creature that resembled nothing so much as a very surprised coffee filter, simply fainted dead away. As alarms blared and translator devices smoked from the effort of conveying the sheer volume of alien profanity now filling the air, Sarah turned to Raj with a sheepish grin. Too much.
Raj, his face buried firmly in his hands, merely groaned in response.
Just as it seemed that humanity's first official contact with the galactic community was about to end in either war or a very strongly worded letter to Earth's non-existent Department of Extraterrestrial Beverages, an unexpected voice cut through the pandemonium. Silence. Dull, the roar, which somehow managed to convey exasperation in at least 17 different frequencies, came from the Grand Arbiter. The glittery cloud being pulsed with barely contained annoyance as it turned its attention, or at least what Sarah assumed was its attention. It was hard to tell with beings that lacked discernible sensory organs to the human delegation. Captain Sarah Chen of Earth, the Arbiter's voice reverberated through the chamber, managing to sound both terrifying and oddly like a disappointed barista. Do you have any idea what you've just done? Sarah, her bravado faltering slightly in the face of what appeared to be an angry disco ball with the power to reshape reality, cleared her throat. Ordered a ventigalactic latte with extra foam. The Arbiter's glittery form seemed to vibrate with barely contained. Something. Rage, amusement, caffeine withdrawal? It was hard to tell with beings composed primarily of sparkles and cosmic background radiation. Ordered A. Oh, for the love of all that is caffeinated, the Arbiter's voice dripped with sarcasm that transcended species barriers. You've managed to do something that no other species has achieved in the entire history of the Galactic Confederation.
Sarah perked up at this, the last vestiges of her coffee high making her perhaps a bit too enthusiastic. Really? What's that? Most creative use of coffee in a first contact scenario.
You, the Arbiter continued, ignoring Sarah's attempt at levity, have managed to unite the entire council. In complete and utter bafflement, a murmur of agreement rippled through the assembled aliens. Sarah couldn't help but notice that more than a few of them were looking at the humans with something that seemed suspiciously like admiration. I mean, really, the Arbiter continued, warming to its theme. What are we supposed to do with you? You laugh in the face of evaluation, turn potential diplomatic disasters into impromptu coffee tastings, and then waltz in here like you're attending a— what did you call it? A coffee clatch. Sarah, sensing that the tide might be turning in their favor, decided to double down on the humanity. Well, your Grand Arbiterness, she said, pulling a slightly squashed packet of instant coffee from her pocket. Where I come from, we have a saying: when life gives you lemons, make coffee, or was it lemonade? Either way, when life drops you in the middle of a galactic confederation you didn't even know existed, you might as well try to make some friends. Coffee. She held out the packet, waggling it invitingly. The Arbiter's glittery form pulsed in what might have been confusion, amusement, or possibly an allergic reaction to the concept of instant coffee. You are, without a doubt, the most confounding species we have ever encountered. Oh, thanks, Sarah beamed. We take our coffee black and our compliments however they come. And then, to the shock of everyone present, possibly including itself, the Grand Arbiter began to laugh. It wasn't a human laugh, of course. It sounded more like wind chimes having an existential crisis while high on espresso, but it was unmistakably an expression of mirth. Oh, cosmic jester, preserve us, the Arbiter wheezed, or at least Sarah assumed it was wheezing. It's hard to tell with beings that don't technically breathe. I haven't been this entertained since, well. As the laughter spread through the council chamber, a realization began to dawn on the assembled beings. These humans, with their irreverence, their adaptability, and their bizarre ability to find humor in even the most dire situations, not to mention their equally bizarre obsession with a particular roasted bean, might just be exactly what the Galactic Confederation needed. Well then, Captain Chen, the Arbiter said, its glittery form seeming to smile somehow, I believe we have much to discuss. But first, I simply must know what exactly is this instant coffee, and why does it smell like that? And so began humanity's official induction into the galactic community. It wasn't smooth, it wasn't dignified, and it certainly wasn't what anyone had expected. But as Sarah happily explained the finer points of various coffee brewing methods to a collection of beings that ranged from mildly intrigued to absolutely horrified, one thing became abundantly clear. The galaxy would never be the same again, and that, my dear students, Ambassador Zix 427 concluded, his tentacles waving dramatically, is how humanity managed to break every single protocol, diplomatic norm, and probably a few laws of physics, all while securing their place in the Galactic Confederation. The lecture hall was silent for a moment as the young aliens tried to process the sheer improbability of the tale they'd just heard. Then, inevitably, a forest of appendages shot into the air. But Ambassador One student, a being that looked like a cross between a coffee grinder and a very confused cactus, asked, "What about the part where humans showed the aliens what coffee could do? You said they were believed to be weak until then." Zix 427's bioluminescent spots flashed in what might have been the alien equivalent of a mischievous grin. "Ah, yes. Well, you see, after the humans joined the Confederation, we quickly discovered that their, shall we say, unique relationship with caffeine extended far beyond mere diplomacy." He called up a holographic display, showing footage that made even the most hardened of the students gasp in a mixture of awe and horror. This, Zix 427 said, pointing to a scene of utter chaos, is from the Zyglobian conflict of 2157. The humans, outnumbered and outgunned, managed to defeat an entire armada by accidentally spilling a shipment of cold brew into their ship's experimental drive system, creating a localized time distortion that trapped the enemy fleet in a temporal loop of their own terrible battle strategies. The students stared in disbelief as the footage showed human ships, trailing what appeared to be a mixture of coffee and exotic particles, zigzagging through space, while a much larger alien fleet tied itself in knots, trying to catch them. And this, Zix 427 continued, switching to another scene, is from the Great Caffeine Uprising. The humans ended a century-long civil war in less than a day by introducing both sides to something they called latte art. We're still not entirely sure if it was a brilliant peace strategy or a form of caffeinated hypnosis, but it worked. The hologram showed a vast alien city, its streets filled not with the expected scenes of battle, but with beings of all shapes and sizes hunched over steaming mugs, creating intricate designs in foam, while human baristas looked on with expressions of bemused pride. The list goes on. Zix 427 said, his tentacles gesticulating wildly. The Decaf Rebellion ended by a well-timed joke about the enemy commander's choice of sweetener. The siege of Mokadon Prime lifted when a human barista accidentally created a drink so delicious that both sides laid down their arms to get the recipe. And let's not forget the quantum espresso quandary, which was solved by a human physicist who, and I quote, just started pushing buttons on the coffee machine to see what would happen. The students were in various states of disbelief, awe, and in one case, what appeared to be a caffeine-induced molt. But Sir, another student ventured, this one a being that seemed to be mostly coffee beans with a vague suggestion of a body. Surely not all human victories can be attributed to 2. Blind luck, reckless caffeine consumption, and a blatant disregard for the laws of probability. Zix 427 finished for them. Oh, make no mistake, humans are capable of brilliant strategy and unparalleled bravery. It's just that more often than not, their greatest victories seem to come when they throw the manual out the airlock and, as they say, brew it by ear. He deactivated the hologram and fixed the students with all 4 of his eyes. The point, my young friends, is this: in all our eons of space exploration, technological advancement, and cultural refinement, we had forgotten one of the most powerful forces in the universe, the sheer, unpredictable potential of a well-caffeinated chaos agent. Humans remind us that sometimes the best solution isn't the most logical one. Sometimes you need to take a leap of faith, armed with nothing but your wits, your courage, and a really good cup of coffee. As the lecture hall buzzed with excited conversation, debates about human nature, and at least 3 spontaneous plans to revolutionize galactic diplomacy through the strategic application of espresso, Ambassador Zix 427 allowed himself a small smile. The galaxy had indeed never been the same since humans and their coffee arrived on the scene. And while it might be a bit more chaotic, a bit less predictable, and significantly more likely to vibrate with caffeine-induced energy, he had to admit it was a far more interesting place for it. The class dismissed, he announced. And remember, next week, we'll be covering human recreational activities. I suggest you all prepare yourselves mentally, physically, and possibly invest in some protective gear. I hear we're starting with something called extreme ironing. I'm not entirely sure what it is, but I'm told it involves both caffeine and adrenaline, so brace yourselves. The ensuing mix of excitement and terror from his students told Zix 427 all he needed to know. The legacy of Captain Sarah Chen and her coffee-loving crew lived on, inspiring a new generation of galactic citizens to embrace the unexpected, find humor in the absurd, and always be prepared for the possibility of spontaneous coffee breaks. After all, in a universe as vast and unpredictable as theirs, you never knew when you might need to save the day with nothing more than a bad pun and a really good espresso.